Does the story of Noah's Ark disprove the whole Bible? In ways it can, but only if you are just as uncompromising as the very people you're trying to disprove. Those of you who know of the video I'm referring to and the channel it's associated with may understand my reasons for doing this video, or just think I'm going a bit too far. I am very aware that I'm going to be seen as jealous and bitter for having far fewer subscribers than this video after over a year of doing my own videos, whereas that channel has been on the wagon since the first spring lambs, which hasn't been that long at all. That might be true, but if you base your whole argument on that, it's a waste of time. Think what you want, I don't care. Truth Hurts is a young channel, and it may seem like bullying, but we are merely doing the same thing in different directions, like a road sweeper and a leaf blower. That aside, let's get into the meat of this video, because I came across the above mentioned video when getting something else uploaded, and when I saw it, it just popped me on the radar. I don't tend to linger on these videos, because I know full well I'll just end up getting stuck down to a rabbit hole of discussions and pointless backlash. And I had a better idea. I had to get a better idea of what he was on about, as I hate making assumptions and I didn't need that one to build up. After watching, I can see many of his points: the circular reasoning, the warped use of the theory of evolution, and the blunt approach to the arguments of reason. However, he's hit similar pitfalls that others face and rarely address. Just so, I'm going to address them here. Firstly, the classic timeline assumptions. It's based on the Masoretic dates, which are calculated from the ages of the patriarchs, and gives us approximately 4,000 years of history to play with regards to where the flood took place, when. This is why I don't like going by these dates, because it leaves out so much of human history and the history of life in general. Because there's plenty of evidence of a flood on a biblical scale. This most dates back to the dawn of mankind in terms of evolution, and long before written records would have existed. So, going by the Masoretic dates, the timeline is unrealistic. Second, the number of animals. This is something deeper and can be easy to mistake with the classical picture books, since he went further than most biblical skeptics and used the whole area of the ark, without giving the exact given numbers in the Bible. But I'm inclined to believe he did his due diligence on that. And calculated not only the amount of space allocated for each animal, but the food storage required to feed them all. There is little fault in that, but he hits the classic problem with numbers and the spread of the animals. Yes, if all the animals were let out on Mount Ararat, it makes sense that they would be distributed in a even spread, with more concentration in Turkey and then spreading out across the world. However, that fails to address two things, assuming that it was true in the first place, obviously. First, human interference. We are in a mass extinction event right now. With the sheer amount of animals we're killing off, the sheer amount of animals we're making go extinct because of us. And that area around Mount Ararat would have been the first place that animals would have encountered humans again. Yes, they were humans born from Noah's line, but that doesn't mean we're any better. So, sure enough, if any animal extinction started happening, it would have happened in the region of Ararat, and certainly within Mesopotamia. Second, animals such as kiwis, koalas, kangaroos, and all those creatures from far-flung lands would have had a harder time getting to the Ark in the first place. And assuming they were in a position to be evolved in the first place, they would have been isolated from the other animals for ages beforehand. And since Australia is still isolated from us, this means to get from where they originally were to the Ark in time before the flood happened, they must have had some help, presumably from God. So it stands to reason they would have had the same amount of help getting back home. So that would cancel out any distribution of species because they would have been sent straight back home. It's a bit like having mates fly in to see another friend at their funeral or party, but then do they scatter off, spread out? No, they go straight back to where they came from, most often. It's far more likely that it was the local fauna that were called to the Ark, which would have included your classic menagerie creatures such as lions, camels, giraffes, and elephants. But sadly, no kangaroos, no cassowaries, and no llamas, and no penguins either. Yes, the Bible says that every animal was called the Ark, but it didn't say every animal on the planet. Something that the truth hurts touched upon, but didn't seem to notice. He mentioned that the biblical authors didn't know about taller mountains in Ararat, such as Everest, Cotopaxi, stuff like that. Far taller mountains. Depending on the translation you go by, it only says clean and unclean or wild animals. I suggest seeing Genesis 6:19 and 7:2-4. Maybe 17, I don't remember quite exactly. But if you look on Bible Hub, look down the translations, you will see what I'm talking about there. Thirdly, the flood itself. Just because it's based in Mesopotamia, which even by biblical law is known as a river basin, doesn't mean the flood isn't significant. Two things come to light that he fails to address, and just seem to stick out pretty obviously. One being the seemingly universal destructive power of floodwaters. Now that's understandable, particularly in modern days, since practically every human settlement on floodplains is going to suffer when floods come. I mean, in Bangladesh, in India, and even here in Britain, when a river bursts its banks, many people suffer because houses get swept away. However, Egypt is an exception to this, since the annual flooding of the Nile is an event that is needed to sustain agriculture in the Nile River basin. Remember, this is an arid region. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if the same is true for other river-based cultures. I can't think of any off the top of my head, and I haven't had the chance to do research into this, but I would have to guess that there's a link between helpful river deities and beneficial floodings. I'll do some more research on it at some point and see if I can collate that theory. Second, the direction of the ark's travel. Just one look at the map provided in his video shows the ark went upriver from where it was towards Mount Ararat. This is based on a big river flood. It wouldn't have been going uphill, heavily implying a flood that raised sea level. Now, I don't know where Noah and his family were based when they built the ark originally, but there are only two possibilities. One in lower Mesopotamia, like modern day Iraq, round about where the map suggests, hence it would have been pushed up by a rise in sea level. The other is in the Mediterranean basin. The last I mentioned because on one or more occasions in geological history, the Straits of Gibraltar have been forced together, closing off the Mediterranean Sea, resulting in it drying up. There are layers of halite and other salt-based minerals piled up in the Mediterranean basin that clearly suggest a mass evaporation event that could only be dealt with, that could only be caused by the closing of the straits. The barrier was opened eventually on more than a couple of occasions, and the basin was flooded once more. It could have been a slow, steady procession of water, or it could have been a big rush of water. We don't know. Sound like a biblical flood? Well, I have seen an issue with this theory. The last time that event occurred was 5.3 million years ago, long before the first true hominids had evolved. This is way beyond the ken of even the earliest oral traditions, and so wouldn't have been remembered at all, let alone spoken about in later years. However, pluvial events such as Abasia pluvia, Monsteria pluvia, and the Neolithic subpluvial event all happened within the time of early man and can be passed down in stories. The earliest of these events, Abasia pluvia, was, I think that was it, was 120,000 years ago. Humans have been known to wear clothes 50,000 years before that. Clearly, they would have been able to tell of a great flood that happened. Be able to have boats at that time? I don't know. But we'll have to figure that out. Fourthly, Noah's children. This is an interesting one because that wasn't a confusion by the author of this video himself, but an additional idea put forward by a relative. Yes, being married for hundreds of years and then suddenly having 3 children doesn't seem likely, and saying having control over reproductive powers is an absolutely ridiculous explanation. Just for that last one, perhaps saying having greater control over his sexual urges or being willing to control his outpouring is a better explanation. Since Noah was, well, at least compared to the rest of humanity, perfect. But if you remember, the ages of the patriarchs are unrealistic at best, and records would never have been so precise back then, even if they had them. It's unlikely that Noah's even close to the age that the Bible claimed he had been. Some researchers suggest the ages are perfect numbers by some arithmetic reckoning. I don't understand it. And my own research suggests moons or seasons are a better turn of phrase than years. This makes the lack of children in early years less unusual, since couples today try to have children early on and can only succeed in their 30s or 40s sometimes. It has been known. Fifthly, insects on the ark. I don't know if the insect argument has any room to move, since if you just have two of every kind of insect, you don't have to worry overly much about the room. And if you bear in mind many are so small they can ride on the large animals, it makes sense they can travel with the ark. As for mosquitoes, ticks, and fleas, and the pathogens they spread, you have to remember insects breed at incredible rates, and so don't need as long as, say, a monkey to change into different forms. And the viruses needed even less time. The flu reproduces so fast that a new vaccine is needed every year, and the cold is practically untreatable by vaccine. And to give a more current reference, COVID-19 has only existed in a human-compatible form for less than 2 years, and has already split into different variants across the globe. And if you want to push the God sees all that is to come argument, we need to remember what could have happened if we killed baby Hitler. For that, I'll refer you to a link to Stephen Fry talking about killing baby Hitler. Sounds strange, but it's worthwhile watching. This all comes down to taking an oral story literally. This isn't unique. Lots of people do this with, but simply because I had the image of my bardic friends telling the self-same story around a campfire doesn't mean everyone else has the same image in their heads. Having this understanding helps a lot to see how stories change over time. Babel aside, one local flood seemed to cover the whole world and then getting blown out of proportion, especially when you bear in mind that a lot of rain makes it hard to see more than a few feet. Mathematical figures being used in the current references rather than the original ones. The warnings of floods making the tale live on in tribes near to water, and details like ages, times, and depths being taken as gospel when they were originally mere embellishments, can make it harder to pinpoint the true bones of the story. However, I've heard that does not necessarily mean that the story isn't the same. I've heard different versions of the same story from the same books. For example, Rumpelstiltskin, Goldilocks, or Cinderella. I've heard different versions of them, and some crop up in different cultures. The classic one I can think of off the top of my head, the basic plot goes like this. A poor woodcutter finds a band of thieves hiding their treasure in a magic mountain. He took some treasure, was found out by his brother, tried to claim all of it for himself, only to get locked in the mountain, where he was found by the thieves and killed. Sound familiar? Some people may know that from Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, which is a classic tale of the 1001 Nights. However, I first heard of it in Grimm's Fairy Tales, and the story was called Simile Mountain. I had to look it up, had to look at the spelling for it by doing a rough internet search. It was pretty hard going, but just in that alone, I found two more versions of the same story using different phrases to open the mountain. That just shows that whilst a phrase that could be used to open the mountain is variable, that does not mean the story is any different. Just because you called it Simile Mountain or Mount Simai, open yourself, or open sesame, that isn't a bone in the story. Bone is the fact it was a mountain with treasure in, and thieves were storing the treasure in there. The bones are there. The meat is different. That's how stories change. Now, to be fair, this isn't his fault. Openly saying he was from a Jehovah's Witnesses family explains the whole thing. Saying the Bible that literally makes any secular line of thought near impossible to reconcile and can result in a hard but brittle faith. One hit at the wrong point can cause it to break. I like to think of that sort of faith like cast iron. It seems pretty good, pretty solid, but it only survives under certain pressures. The wrong pressure from the wrong angle can cause it to fracture, and it's near impossible to fix. This is something I see constantly throughout hardcore fundamentalist churches. My job isn't easy with the best of times, with the cold denouncing atheists on one side and the hardcore, uncompromising fundamentalists on the other. I've been doing a lot about atheists, but at some point I should do a video on the fundamentalists and their problems. Frankly, I'm surprised that the Jehovah's Witnesses took the finding of Noah's Ark as speculation rather than solid evidence, because I thought they would jump at it. I was just as dubious, since, for all we know, the people examining the remains of what could have been the Ark could have been devout believers and expected to be the Ark in the first place, and so found something that looked very much like it, rather than the actual Ark itself. It has been known. It's the confirmation bias. Ultimately, I can't blame this chap for leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses. I think going hardcore atheist is a bit of a backswing and shows how much control over his life they have, since he's now doing more or less the same thing he's done with them, only on an atheistic angle now. As the old saying goes, two wrongs don't make a right. And I don't know how else he's supporting himself. Though, as many people notice, he does have a large enough number of subscribers and views to warrant monetization. Since he's a new channel and focusing on subjects that I don't think others have hashed over, I'm not going to discourage him from this. In fact, I'm interested to see where he goes from here and what he says in later videos. If we get the chance to do a back and forth, that would be great. But I'm the gauntlet here. I'm not going to lay down a challenge. I may do at some point, but for now, let the man win his spurs before crossing swords with him. But I'll leave you with this. The truth is a double-edged sword. It hurts, but it hurts in both directions. Remember that, my friend. And God be with you.